Hey Internet, Pokémon Sword and Pokémon Shield, which I will refer to as Swish, are the first mainline entries in the 8th generation of Pokémon games which would begin the series mark on the Nintendo Switch. In fact, you might already know, but these games are 6 years old already, and I'm beginning to sport a thin layer of dust from the years since then. As crazy as this may seem, I was 12 when they released. Now I can purchase games with money whenever I so please, but back then every penny felt more important. Saving for the new Pokemon games was at the forefront of my young teen mind. Suffice it to say, I had only managed to raise roughly enough for a brand new beautiful yellow Switch Lite. Yet the game was still too expensive for my wallet. Instead, I had to ask my grandparents for a copy of Sword for Christmas. And oh boy, it certainly was a joyful Christmas morning. Upon starting the game, I soon found that this would be different. Up to this point, I had played many of the older titles and felt a good sort of cohesion between games. But Sword and Shield changed how I view Pokemon games, and it has never been the same since. It's funny because I cannot really explain what does it. Maybe it's the fact that these are the first home console mainline titles, but hopefully I can find the answers for myself later on in this retrospective review. Okay, so what better way to talk about Sword and Shield than starting off with their Pokédex? 400 Pokemon are included in the base game Pokédex, which is quite a chore and will certainly keep you busy for hours. However, that was it. Other Pokemon were non-transferable, since these games started the Dexit trend, which radically reduced the amount of available Pokemon in-game. Sword and Shield were indeed the very first Pokemon games not to include a way to transfer any and all Pokemon forward, as even past 3DS titles allowed for all Pokemon to be used in-game, well over 800 in fact. Sun and Moon did so much with so little, and yet these new home console Pokemon games simply can't keep up anymore. To many, this alienated fans from having access to their favorite Pokemon, and for some, is simply a deal breaker. It doesn't help that it just doesn't make sense that the Switch, even more powerful than the 3DS and Wii U, just can't have all the Pokemon anymore. It didn't make sense. And though reasons were stated for having solid arguments against why, it just could not keep being met. Not having all Pokemon available in the game was a big deal breaker. But, assuming you don't mind about half of all Pokemon being cut off from the game, there is a lot to enjoy even still. It probably goes without saying, but 400 Pokemon is still a lot, and for me, it was more than enough of a dish to feast on, giving me hundreds of hours. In fact, as of recording this video, I just finished my living dex of these games, arranging every single Pokemon in a Pokedex in numerical order, evolutions and all, which felt like an unimaginable slog for the longest time. Because future games like Scarlet and Violet and the Legends games and the Gen 4 remakes Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl all had numerous quality of life changes to improve the dex completing process. Going back to these games to finally assemble my living record of Galar inhabiting Pokemon was a tough pill to swallow, as Sword and Shield just have a slower way of getting things done. Say what you will about the game's difficulty level, but some of these rare spawns are incredibly frustrating to track. I'm looking at you, 2% random encounter Drampa surrounded by Noivern. I want to talk to the Game Freak employee who did this. And it's truly safe to say that these games do not shy away from the tedious, gotta catch 'em all mentality that is the Pokemon series. So for me, at least 400 Pokemon, not bad. However, what is terrible, horrific, absolutely atrociously bad is the bland aesthetic. Now, never once did I prefer to have the black-white canvas that is most of the UI, even when compared to other games like Sun and Moon with cool in-battle stylized screens, or even the funk of Diamond and Pearl where you could customize your text boxes, which by the way I chose yellow boxes of course. Sword and Shield just look incredibly lifeless. The simple bubbles for move selection, with albeit nice typing colorations, just added to the overwhelming amount of white on the battle menu. This blandness that plagued Sword and Shield was further exemplified within the TGC itself, where the cards have never looked more basic in my opinion. I mean, I know that the simplicity of the UI and the clear-cut designs make for a sound fluidity, and some honestly prefer the simplicity of it all, but just a little more variety in the art department would have gone a really long way for me. At least for future Pokemon games like Winds and Waves, I hope we can go back to a more artsy look. Moving on, unlike other games, this game had a wild area, and that was a mini open world environment which brought the addition of camera controls for the very first time, and was a bold step forward for the series. But after spending 600 plus hours in the game, I just figured that I don't know what to do anymore, which is a great thing to have, but once you manage to complete your Pokedex, there is simply nothing to do besides either competitive preparation or shiny hunting. Speaking of the Pokédex, weather conditions were also a new addition to the games, which affected the Pokemon you'd see in the overworld. One day you might see a Lapras in the lake, next day a Gastrodon, or even a Gyarados. The wild area was primitive. Next up is gameplay and world building. Game Freak, the long-standing developers of the Pokemon games, have been under criticism intensely for the past few years, specifically these last few years, and some people have gone as far as to call them lazy for their lack of polished final products. I'm not going to pretend I understand even the slightest shred of game development, but as the midnight release attender for Scarlet and Violet, I'm also no stranger to the state of some of the modern Pokemon games. Other games have been with their own flaws, Sun and Moon Double Battles, I'm looking at you, but oddly enough, I can't see any apparent game-breaking, frame-destroying faults to this one. Even as a hardcore fan and a person of many opinions, these games were for the most part complete and have so much attention to detail. I'm not British, but I've heard from other YouTubers such as Canny Eevee who applauded Game Freak for their cultural slang and tidbits to really sell the Galar region's origins. Simply put, the games look fantastical and really make you feel like you're in Europe yourself, strolling through the rolling fields. Gameplays-wise, it's Pokemon to a point. Literally, this is Pokemon's first ever home console generational title, and it certainly was a Pokemon game. Many were hoping for a more evolved concept, especially after the 20-odd years of the same old thing. But what can I say, the formula just works. For you veterans out there, this is mostly the same old 8 gyms, routes, and stellar vibes, but what really sets this game apart from the rest is in its emphasis on a wider audience. You can tell a lot was done to ensure that anybody could hop into this monster-catching fray for the first time ever, or since Red and Blue, and feel right at home. Which leads me to my final point, the replayability. One of the main draws of playing a Pokemon game is the sheer variety of choices the player can make. With hundreds of different Pokemon with different moves, stats, and designs, it's no wonder that replayability is a big part of the Pokemon experience. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon had the difficulty to support it. X and Y are very nostalgic-inducing at this current point in time. Black and White are heavily praised these days, and they're priced accordingly. And even Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, the oddballs, have a unique set of motion controls to set them apart from the rest. Do Sword and Shield stack up? Or do they fall flat under the mediocrity of it all? Well, I say that depends on you. Do you like the way that routes flow together seamlessly? Do you appreciate the added immersion aspects of camping and cooking with your Pokemon? Do you like amazing music or playing on a TV or having handheld options? Sword and Shield may be flawed, but to the eye of the beholder matters not what it cannot see. So, enjoy your curry, my friends, and do not forget to return to the Galar region soon. Peace out.